Okay, hello and welcome everybody to today's event. I'm Jason Gumper from msdynamicsworld.com, and I'm pleased to welcome all of you to today's session all about going mobile with Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations. Our presenter today is Rick Schoenecker. It's great to have him with us again. And as we get started, please know that we do welcome your questions and comments throughout today's event. The best way to provide those is to look for the Q&A block on the right side of the presentation window today. If you don't see the Q&A, look for the option sort of in the middle of your screen to enable that. I know Rick will be saving time at the end for questions. So without any further delay, I am going to hand things off to Rick to get us started.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Hope you can all hear me okay. My name is Rick Schoenecker. I'm with PowerObjects. And just a quick blurb on PowerObjects. So we are 100% focused on Microsoft Dynamics 365. So everything from finance and operations to sales to Dynamics 365 for talent and field service. We're focused solely on that. We're trying to drive success for your end-to-end journey with our 4 pillars of service, support, education, and add-ons. So a little bit about me. My name is Rick Schoenecker. Again, I'm an infrastructure and technology consultant in our Dynamics 365 ERP practice. I've been working with the Microsoft Dynamics suite of products as a consultant for about the last, 16 years or so. Started off back in the day with Dynamics GP and CRM, then moved on and really started focusing on what was called back then Dynamics AX, starting with versions 4, 2009, 2012, and now 365 for finance and operations. I really focus on the technology side. So back in the earlier days, it was things like setting up the infrastructure to support, on-premise installations, setting up the Microsoft stack and SQL and SharePoint, installing, configuring, and upgrading the applications, and facilitating things like integrations and such. Now, obviously, the landscape has changed a little bit. So as my role, as I imagine probably many of yours have. So I focus a little bit more on things like the Azure Stack, the business applications, integrations, things like that. You can see on the right, there's a picture of Gary. He was going to be assisting with the presentation today, but he got pulled in a different direction with some client obligations, so I'm flying solo. So apologies to any of you who came solely just to hear Gary speak. He wishes he could be here, but he can't. So here's the agenda today. We're going to just do a little bit of an overview of the Unified Operations Platform, so the mobile platform overview. We're going to talk about how to deploy the mobile workspaces. We'll get into a little bit on how we can create a pretty basic mobile workspace. Then some techniques and things you could do or think about doing if the basic mobile workspace creation doesn't meet your needs. So there's some ways you can do some extra stuff to do some extra actions or make things a little bit more eye-appealing. We'll touch on that briefly. And then if we have time, we'll go in and talk a little bit about PowerApps and try to do a basic little bit of a demo on how you could maybe get started with PowerApps and use that as a way to access finance and operations mobile. And then obviously we'll take some time for questions. So a little bit of an introduction on the mobile platform. So out of the box, Dynamics 365 for finance and operations has a pretty cool suite of mobile workspaces that are based off of the forms and the logic that exists within finance and operations. So by using these mobile workspaces, workspaces, you can develop and reuse that business logic and modeling that's already there in finance and operations. And these mobile apps offer kind of a rich offline and mobile interaction. And it's an easy-to-use kind of designer experience. So Microsoft is really pushing that low-code, no-code solution, that citizen developer approach to doing things. And with the technologies behind the mobile workspaces, you can create some on your own without doing any application coding whatsoever. And we'll get into that in a bit. So with this mobile platform, the users can view and edit and act on the business data, even if the network connectivity is intermittent, or even sometimes if the mobile device is completely offline. And then when the device reestablishes its network connection, the offline data and the operations are synced up with finance and operations. Again, what's cool about this is IT admins or developers or power users can build and publish mobile workspaces that have been tailored to their org. If the out-of-the-box ones don't suffice, again, admins or power users or developers can design their own workspaces using kind of a point-and-click workspace designer that's included with finance and operations. And additionally, if you, like I said, if you want to get really complex or do some things that the out-of-the-box point-and-click interface don't offer up, there are some ways to use business logic to kind of extend this framework. So let's talk a little bit about the form logic. Okay. So what happens when I interact with a form in the mobile app? So the user opens up the mobile app for the first time. They see their published workspaces. They pick their workspace, and the mobile app is going to reach out to finance and operations for that kind of initial get. Okay. F&O is then going to provide the data required based on that workspace and that initial get and send that back. The mobile app is then actually going to cache that data, so it's not a constant back and forth, and this is what kind of allows that offline, or if there's intermittent connectivity, it allows for activities to still take place. And then any future attempts, so if, let's say I'm looking up customer information and it's got that data cached, it's going to try to do my next attempt off that cache data first rather than be reaching back out to the server. And a little bit how these actions are processed. So there's, getting the data, and then some of the workspaces out of the box are ones you can create, allow you to perform actions against that data. So let's say I could look up a customer and the customer I'm looking for doesn't exist. This is a basic example. I could have a workspace that would allow me to create a customer, put in whatever the information is, and send that back to finance and operations and create that customer on the back end. So here's a little bit about how those actions work. Okay. So when I'm in my workspace, I choose to perform an action. Let's say add the customer. So if I'm online, it's going to try to sync up with the mobile app framework, or offline, it will still do the same and kind of cache that information. Okay. And then it pulls that information back, and I can interact with it at that point. So then I, let's say, enter my new customer information into the workspace, and it's going to cache that stuff, and then it's going to kick off a queue to sync that request back to the server. So you'll see that operation happen, and you can, in the mobile workspace, see the results of those queued operations. and then that request gets synchronized back to finance and operations. So again, some of that ability, if there's intermittent connectivity, to still be able to interact with the mobile workspace. The other nice thing about it is when that request for sync goes back to finance and operations, once that's kind of queued up, the user could go do another action, okay? So let's say I'm adding that customer and I hit the submit button. That gets queued up. I don't have to wait for that operation to finish before I could do something else. So I could then move on to another activity like maybe creating and submitting an expense report. So just kind of a little bit of a summary. So this web client is highly connected to the AS, and then the AOS kind of keeps that open user session and has the forms actually open on the server. A little bit about the user sessions. So the mobile apps create the user sessions in short bursts, only while the app is being synced on the server. But if there's no actions to sync to the server and the local cache is up to date, it's not going to keep reaching out over and over and over and over and over again. It's going to use that cache data, and that allows you to do some of the operations offline. Okay, and this is just kind of another diagram of how this whole interaction takes place. I'll kind of spare you some of the details, but it's really kind of just a big picture of those pieces we just discussed on the previous slides. So again, a little bit more about the logic behind the forms and the actions. So the user shouldn't expect a form logic to run every time that the page is loaded or an action is started. So that logic on the back end isn't happening every single time because actions are cached. You should never expect the logic to run while an app is completing an action. So again, the logic on the back end is only happening when things are being synced with the AOS. And again, it uses out-of-the-box business logic. So the forms and stuff that are already sitting in finance and operations. If you want to do a process that isn't based on something in finance and operations, you got to develop that form in there, and then you build your mobile workspace based on that new form. And we'll talk about a little bit of a specific example in a second. So out of the box, there's, I don't know, 10, 15 mobile workspaces that are sitting there for you to publish and use. I'll touch briefly on each one of those and what they can do. So one is company directory. You can see a list of all your employees in an organization. You can search for employees, get the contact info, and then actually reach out and contact them from the profile information. Now, before I move forward, some of these are a little more useful than others. So there are some that do some pretty cool action. Some are really, really basic. But what I found, even with the basic ones, it really kind of made light bulbs go off for me about other things that we could create that aren't there based on, you know, the stuff that was already available. So here's one of the ones that may or may not be as useful as others. Based on that kind of organization hierarchy in finance and operations, you can get a view of your team. So if you're a manager, you can get your direct reports. On the extended reporting team, you can get some detailed information about the different team members, date of birth, years of service, etc. But you can also send a shout out to any individual in the extended reporting team. So invoice approval, this one's probably a little more useful than some of the others. Basically, if I have invoices that are out there for me to approve, I can go into that invoice approval workspace, and I can see information about the invoice and the lines and the distribution details, and I can take an action to actually move that workflow through, either, approve or reject or whatever. So this one's pretty slick. Expense management. Okay, so I can, as an employee, create a new expense report. I can attach credit card transactions and other previously created expenses to that report. I can create new expenses. I can attach receipts, which is pretty cool, just by taking a picture of the receipt and uploading it. Depending on your company's policy, I could add guests to an expense. So for me, if I'm traveling and I'm, going out to eat with a client or whatever, and I try to submit my expense and it exceeds my company's policy on what I can spend, I can indicate that there were guests in attendance, and that's why maybe there's an overage. You can also, depending on the policy, itemize expenses. I can submit my expense report, or if I'm an approver, I can approve or reject expense reports. So this is one that's a little bit more robust out of the box. So purchase order approval, kind of, it is what it says. So any POs that are going through an approval workflow, we'll have a bunch of steps that require one or more people to take actions on it. So, somebody's got to complete a task or approve the PO, or it routes one way or another based on certain criteria. So what this one does is it lets me be able to view and respond to those purchase orders from my mobile device, and it lets me take actions, so I can approve or reject or whatnot and keep that workflow moving. Project time entry, this one's pretty good. I have the ability, so if you're using project time in finance and operations, I can enter my time against projects, and I can do that from a mobile device. I can do it from the field or whatever. So I can enter in my hours, I can look for projects, I can specify categories and activities for time spent on a task, record things as billable, non-billable, enter comments, and submit that stuff to workflow. The inventory on hand, so this basically just gives us a view into our inventory. I can search by product number or name and find things to view and see the inventory status. For, let's say, a selected product, things I can see is like on-hand inventory per site, maybe on-hand inventory per warehouse or location or per batch. And that inventory is displayed in a couple different ways, like physical inventory, so like the total amount, physical reserved inventory, the reserved amount, or inventory that's physically available, that has no reservations. So this one is for vendors, okay? So you could enable a vendor to use this collaboration mobile workspace to view purchase orders that are sent to them for approval. It'll show that PO information, products, quantities, delivery dates, price information, depending on how you configure those vendors. So a user who signs in as a vendor will be able to see which purchase orders are available to them that they have already responded to. Those are awaiting, action. So an example might be a purchase order might be awaiting customer action because the vendor suggested maybe a different delivery date, but the customer hasn't agreed to that date. Vendor can also see purchase orders that have been confirmed but not delivered. So this is a pretty cool out-of-the-box one. Okay, so this was the point where I was going to say let's show how to publish the out-of-the-box workspaces, but that takes like 2 seconds. So I'm going to keep going, and we'll show that when we get into creating an app. Okay. So how do I get started with all this stuff? You have to download the Unified Operations app from either Apple Store or Google Play, or if you're still rocking one of those phased out Microsoft phones or devices, you can get it from the Microsoft Store. So once I download and install the app, you're going to see what the picture that shows up on the left. I have to enter in the URL for my finance and operations environment, okay? I'm going to connect up. It's going to ask me for my credentials, and I provide those, and you get logged in. And this is kind of the landing page you're going to see. So navigation in the mobile app consists of, 4 kind of concepts: dashboard, workspaces, pages, and actions. So if you're on a page, you can perform a bunch of different actions. So, for example, view detailed data, navigate, kind of drill down to other pages for related data. So let's say I'm looking at like a quote. Okay, I can see the header, and then I could drill in, and it would bring up another page that would give me the line item detail. Okay, I can also see a list of actions that might be available for that page. So actions lets you create or edit existing data. And then at any time, you can pull down from the top of the mobile app to refresh the data or the metadata. So, obviously people are going to learn that they're going to want to, initiate that refresh kind of on a regular basis if they're a heavy user of one of these mobile apps. That's also the way to see if I create a mobile workspace, once it's published, the user's got to kind of do that pull down refresh for that new app to show up. Or if I make a change to an app or some business logic on the back end, you got to do that refresh in order for that to appear. So again, when you start the app, you go to the dashboard. On the dashboard, you're going to see the list of workspaces that have been published and that you have access to. And then in each workspace, you're going to see a bunch of pages that are available for that workspace. And this kind of reiterates that. So on a page, you can view the data collected from one or more forms in finance and operations. And again, you can navigate to other pages to see the related data, such as entity details or lines. So then if you're in a workspace that has actions involved, you're going to see at the bottom, and it's kind of highlighted there in yellow, a list of actions that are available on that page. So like back to that customer example, if I'm looking up a list of customers or see customer detail, but if I want to add a customer, down in that action section, you would see, something that might say add customer. If I click that, it's going to bring me up to like a task page where I can either select things or enter things relevant to whatever the action is, and then hit save or submit, or however you label your buttons in order for that action to get kicked off. And again, the updates, you got to pull down to refresh, okay? Okay, so let's really quickly, because we're like halfway through already, let's talk about how we can create a custom workspace. Okay. So before you get started, when you're going to create your workspace, what you want to do is you want to navigate to your finance and operation instance, and you want to add this to the end of the URL, okay, to kind of put this in a mobile mode. And then we're going to navigate over here to the gear icon. So, and we'll move to mobile app. Okay, we talked about, all right. Let's try that again. Come on now. All right, let's try a different one. Sorry about that, guys and girls. Okay, so we'll go to mobile app here, okay? We talked a little bit before, and I skipped over how to publish a mobile app. So you're going to come in here, and you're going to see a list of the mobile workspaces. Now, my list is different than what you're going to see out of the box because I have some in here that are ones that I built or played around with. But you'll see your list of mobile workspaces. If you want to use one, you got to publish it. So we talked about my team. I just highlight this, and if it says not published, I hit publish, and it will go through and publish that. The user is going to have the ability to then see that in their app. Okay. So if I want to create an app, I can go to the ellipsis and I can hit create. Okay, so I want to give it a name. So we'll just call this production orders. I'm going to give it a name, and I'm just going to, for the sake of an example, give it a description. I can choose a workspace color and an icon for it. So we'll just take this one for fun, okay? And so this is going to show the color and the icon that shows up in the mobile app for this workspace, okay? So now, in order to get moving on this, I'm going to do add a page, okay? And I'm going to give this page a name. I'm going to skip the description for the sake of time, and I'm going to click done. Okay, so now, once I'm there, so I said this was like a point-and-click interface, right? So you can see here where it says select fields. I am going to then navigate to a page that I want to build this. And we're going to do all production orders. Let me see if we can switch this. Okay, so once I'm in here, I'm going to click select fields, okay? And this is going to allow me to basically, on this form, select the fields that I want to appear in my mobile workspace. So I'm going to hit select fields, and then it basically just highlights the options on this form for me to select. So I'm going to pick production, item number, maybe quantity, remainder, and let's say status. Okay, now This is really, really basic what we're doing here. All this is doing is it's going to create something that's a lookup, okay? But it gives you an idea if I want to do something simple, what my options are, okay? So at this point, I'm going to click Done, and then Back, and then Done, and I'm going to hit Save. So now I should see my workspace that I created right here. So if I wanted to, I could go in and then publish that workspace, and it would show up in my mobile app. Now, I was going to show you guys this, but I have some issues with our multi-factor authentication on my phone, so I can't get connected up and actually show it on the phone. But if I could, you would see that show up in there. I would drill into it, and all it's going to do is it's going to give me a lookup where I can see the production order and then show the details that I chose. So if I choose this, if you publish, if the user refreshes the workspace, it's going to show up in there. Now, another thing that I'll just kind of touch on quick is, so if you're doing something where you've got, dev, test, prod, UAT, all your different environments, you do have the ability here to, for a workspace that you create, you have the ability to export it out. And basically what it's going to do is it's just going to export out an XML file. I can save it to my desktop or whatever, log into a different environment, and import that app in, and it'll be available for use in the other environment, okay? So let's touch really quick on an action, okay? So we're going to create a different workspace that's based on an action. Oops. So we're just going to call this one customers, okay? And I'm not going to give it a description. And a lot of these icons don't line up, but whatever. I'm just going to pick anything here. We'll pick this one, okay? So now I'm going to do, to add my page, and call it customers, and it's going to give a description, and I'm going to say done. Okay. So I'm going to do all customers here. And I'm going to select my field. So let's do, first, for the sake of simplicity, let's do name, account, and maybe telephone. And we'll click done. So now I'm going to want to add an action, okay? So how can I create a customer, okay? So I'm going to click on this Actions tab, and I'm going to choose to add an action. Okay, so now I need to select my fields in order to create that add customer action. So how do I do that? Basically, you go through the same exercise as if you were going to do this in the application, okay? So if I wanted to add a new customer, I would just click New, okay? And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to select my fields, okay? So, but I'd have to do this as if I was creating a new one, okay? So I picked all the fields that I'm going to need in order to create a customer. And then I'm going to click Save up in here. And I'm going to click Done. It's going to say, have you done all the things you need to do in order for this task to work? I'm going to say yes. And then I'm going to hit back. And back. And done. And save. And then I'm going to publish my mobile workspace. So now basically what I would see is I would go into my mobile workspace. I'm going to have an all customers lookup based on that first page that I created. And then I'm going to see an action on the bottom that says add customer, and it's going to give me those 5 fields, okay? So for like the customer account and the name, I can type it in. For customer group, it's going to be a drop-down. For the zip code, I type that in, and then it's going to populate the city, state information. I can hit done. It's going to submit that back to finance and operations, okay? And then I'll see that customer record show up. I apologize that I can't show that. You're just going to kind of have to take my word for it, I guess. Okay. So we talked a little bit about just using the out-of-the-box forms and actions and things like that. Like, what do I do if, let me rewind. So somebody asked me, can we build a workspace to create a purchase requisition? I'm like, sure, I can try to do that. So I went through kind of the exercise of trying to create the purchase requisition, and I added all my fields and everything like that. But when I went to click the field for the unit of measure, okay, and then I added that to my app and published it, what I found was when I would click the drop-down in the app, it doesn't show me any unit of measure to choose. And I couldn't really figure out why at first. So basically, to summarize, when you click to choose the unit of measure here, what's really stored behind the scenes is the rec ID of the unit of measure record. So I can't have a drop-down to let me pick a rec ID. So we had to create a new form in Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations in order to be able to use that as a lookup form for my action, okay? So we basically just, we created a new form that shows up as unit of measure lookup. We kind of hid that with security, and we went through and just created this super basic form that just displays the unit of measure symbol and the rec ID. And then when I added the unit of measure field, let me see if I can go back here. when I added the unit of measure field here, you can right-click and get to the properties of one of those fields. So this unit of measure field, and there's an option to connect a lookup to it. So what I did is connected the lookup. I had another page for the unit of measure, and I basically said, use this as my lookup page. Okay, and then I was able to have this drop-down display unit of measure, and then we were able to kind of move forward with that purchase requisition. Okay, and then there's a business logic file. You can see kind of that customization code in that business logic file if you were to download it and take a look at it. So a couple other things, and there's some examples of this on Microsoft Docs on how you can customize this. So there's like a file you can add to a mobile app called a business logic. There's an example of it out on GitHub that you can download. And you can basically add, I think it's kind of based on JavaScript, some extra business logic to some of these things to make them a little bit prettier or have some different functionality. So I could, if I had a customer details page like this one here, for the email and the phone field, I could make these clickable so that when I click on it, let's say the email address, it's actually going to open up my email app on my phone and start the process to send a new email. Or the same thing if you were to click on the phone, it's going to open up your phone. Or if there was a URL in there for a company's website or this Terrence's LinkedIn page or whatever, it's going to open that up for you based on that extra logic. Okay. So if you download that logic file, here's how you would add those controls in there to set the link types to perform specific actions. So you can also get into that business logic file. So I said we created this requisition app. And quite honestly, the workspaces that you build yourself aren't really the prettiest when they come out of the box. I mean, you can choose a color and an icon, but the look and feel is a little bit, I don't know, it just doesn't look slick. So you can go in and do some custom page formatting to make it look nicer. So we did things like, made the button look cooler, changed the backgrounds, changed the fonts, added some borders and did some stuff like that. So I'm not expecting anybody to copy this code and do anything with it, but it's there for you to kind of see that there are ways. Again, they try to be low code, no code, but if you want to make it a little bit more eye appealing, you can do that. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes here. So I was going to talk about PowerApps and go through some basic stuff. I'm going to try to rip through this as fast as I can to try to save some time at the end for some questions. So by now, I think most of you should be familiar with PowerApps and Microsoft's big push for the business application platform. It's basically split into two pieces. So it's the common data service for apps and the common data service for analytics. Analytics is kind of your Power BI. Common data service for apps is creating PowerApps, Microsoft Flow, and then the common data service for building some integrations between things like finance and operations and Dynamics 365 for sales or field service, things like that. So again, based on our time here, I'm just going to rip through these slides. And basically, the summary is this, is Microsoft is making a huge investment in what they're now calling business applications, okay? They really want to encourage people to have the ability to build things with that citizen developer mindset, that no-code, low-code type of activity to kind of extend things or build mobile apps. There's the ability now to even create PowerApps and embed those into finance and operations right in a form. So if you wanted to, let's say, I could see that something where, we shipped something to a customer. An example is having a PowerApp then that grabs that shipping information and goes out and uses a connector to show you the status of the shipping and, on a map where it is or whatever. So there's a bunch of different stuff, and, it's really cool to see the ideas that people are coming up with to build these, low-code solutions and extend the application, okay? I'm going to skip through this. But basically, you connect to your data. There's about 200 separate connectors that are already out there, including for finance and operations. These connectors are smart, okay? So you're not having to write a bunch of code behind the scenes or formulas or everything else in order to build these applications. And if I can do this in like 2 minutes, I will see what we can do here, okay? So, bear with me here. So the first thing you're going to want to do is we're going to want to log into PowerApps, the PowerApps site. You can see the URL on the top. You can, if you have Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations, you should already have some sort of PowerApps licensing. If not, you can do a trial, okay? So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to choose Apps. And what we're going to do here, for the sake of time, is try to, in 5 minutes, create a very, very basic app to do, let's say, we'll do something that is just going to create a quote header, because we don't have time to do everything else. So I'm going to click Create App, okay, and I'm going to do a blank app, and I'm going to do a phone layout. You could do a tablet layout. You could do an app that you already start with a data connection, and it kind of does that kind of like tablet-based app based off of the data connection you make at first. But we're going to do this straight from scratch. So I'm in the PowerApps Studio. I'm going to say I'm going to insert, let's see, what do I want to do here? Okay, I'm going to insert, let's say, a drop-down box. So I've got my drop-down box here. And so all this is right now is sample data that it's showing in here. So I'm going to do View, and I'm going to do Data Sources. And this is what I'm talking about, where PowerApps has all these connectors, and it's smart. Okay, I'm going to pick Add a Data Source. And here's a list of connections that I already have available in PowerApps. And these are connections to Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations. So I'm going to pick this one here. And then it's smart. It knows who I'm logged in as, and it knows what environments I have access to. So I want to pick the environment that is applicable for this app, the one I want to see it interact with. I'm going to choose this one here. And then it makes that connection to finance and operations. And you can see here a bunch of the data entities in the tables that are in finance and operations. So I'm going to pick customers. So I'm going to pick customers here, and it's going to make that connection. And hopefully this won't take too long. We're against the clock here. Okay, so I have my data source. So I'm going to click back on my button here. I'm going to go to Advanced. So now I see this the data connection. It's still thinking I want to use the sample. So I go into the data and I put in customers V2. So now it is connected to that customer entity. And here in the value, here's everything in the customer entity that I could choose from. So I'm going to choose customer account. So what you're going to see in the background, you can see these little dots pulsating up at the top. It's reaching out to that, and pretty soon it's going to start actually return data from that finance and operations instance. So you can see here, now I can see in this drop-down, these are customers. That's an actual customer in here. So what do I want to do? This means nothing to me. So I'm going to add a label. And once I add a label, okay, I want to get the formula for this label. So all this stuff, if you use Excel in PowerApps, all this stuff is formula driven, okay? So what I really want to do with this label is display the customer name. So I want to put in drop down 1, selected organization. And lo and behold, now it's displaying the organization name for the customer that's sitting up here, okay? So if I want to do something, we'll create a quote header, okay? So what I want to do now is I'm going to put a button on here, okay? Again, this is really basic, but if you do something like this, it's kind of a quick win so that you can see how easy it is to build something here, and then you just add on top of that. Other ideas pop up, you learn how to do different things. Use some built-in technology, OCR scanning, you know, geolocation. There's a whole bunch of cool stuff you can use. So I'm going to change this to add quote. And now I need, so now I have my button, okay? So now I need to tell this what to do, okay? I could do this all through a formula, but I don't want to do that. Okay, so I'm going to click on my button here, and under Action, I'm going to pick Flows. Okay, so now this is going to allow me to use Flow to do whatever I want it to do when I click this button in my PowerApps. So I'm going to click Create a New Flow, and this is going to bring me into the Flow Designer. Okay, so I want to change the name of this, and we'll just call it Quote. Okay, so I talked about how PowerApps is smart. So now I'm going to use Flow to create some actions that happen when I click this button. So I'm going to click New Step, Add an Action, and it's going to look for all the connectors that are sitting out here. And I said before, there's 200 plus connectors that are out there. I'm going to choose Dynamics. And I pick Finance and Operations. I'm going to choose Create Record. And I'm going to choose my instance. And sometimes this takes a minute. So hopefully this will be on my side, and it will pop up here pretty quick. And then I can choose the data entity name. So I want to hold on. I want to create a quote. Hold on, bear with me. Let me pull up a note here. Okay, so I'm in my flow. I'm just kind of doing this a little bit out of order, so I'm trying to let's say sales quotation header. So we're just going to do a header. This should give me some advanced options. Oh, come on, man. Okay, here's my advanced options. So I want to tell the flow what to do. So I'm going to go down here to, this is telling it to create a quotation header. I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to put USMS in here to make it easy. And then I'm going to go down to use customer account. Can't find it. Customer account. Okay. And what I'm doing now is I'm saying ask in PowerApps. So this is basically saying to me, when I ask in PowerApps, hit that drop down, and then I create a quote, hit the quote button, it's going to take the information from the drop down and put it in there. Okay. So then there's one more step I need to do. And I can see my flow here. I'm going to pick this flow to take care of this. And then there's a part in here where it is asked for a formula. So I need to know what to put in here. So I'm going to put in drop down 1. So basically take the info from drop down 1, selected, selected customer account, etc. My formula checks out. So now if I were actually, at this point, if I were to save this and run it, if I click this button, it's actually going to go through and create a quote in finance and operations. So I know we're up against it here. We got about 2 minutes left. I apologize for this taking a little bit longer. But I think we'll cut it here. You'll have to take my word for me that that quote header is going to show up in finance and operations. But it does. So if we want to open it up for questions at this point, I'm cool with that. I appreciate everybody tuning in and listening to what I have to say about the kind of mobile platform stuff that's available out there. So let's go ahead if there's any questions and take those now.
All right, thanks, Rick. And yeah, so if anyone does have any questions, please do enter them now. One that came in earlier was just regarding getting access to the recording and the slides from today's event. We will be providing information to all of you about how to get access to those in the next few days. So that is on the way for everyone who registered. Let me just look here for any other questions that have come in. Well, I'm not seeing any, so I'll make a final call here. I just want to, in wrapping up, mention we do have a very brief survey for you after you depart today. We appreciate any feedback you can provide. And again, that's after you leave. One question that came in asking, in the mobile app, is there any way to have input, to have the input field able to use a camera's phone to get a QR code, for example?
I would do that with a Power App. Yes, you could do the business logic. So I don't know if it will capture a QR code, but like I talked about with the expense reporting, there is a way to utilize the camera function. So I'd go out to GitHub and I should have provided the URL, but I didn't. But you should be able to find the unified communications. There's a project out there and there's a logic file. You might be able to do that. But with PowerApps, there is there's logic built in to make a field take advantage of the camera and read a QR code for sure. So we built some stuff that say, for example, if we were connecting it to 365 for sales, CRM, we built something that we can take to like a trade show where it will scan somebody's, I can use the camera and take a picture of somebody's business card, and it will use text recognition, and I set up fields, and it will create records in CRM, or we can scan it to read a QR code, and it will do the same thing. So short answer is yes, but I would probably lean towards a Power App because it would be easier.
All right, next question. Any additional license costs for using Flow?
So I would suggest you go out to the PowerApps site, and there is a licensing guide. So based on the subscription you have for finance and operations, the licensing type that you have, you are entitled to a certain level of PowerApps access, and Flow is transactional based, so there is an amount of flows that you can do. And then I think at some point there is a breakpoint where there is a cost. So let's say you didn't have finance and operations at all and you wanted to use Flow, there is a cost involved with that. So yes and no. I can't tell you what that maximum amount of actions is. But with your finance and operations license, you do have a certain, I think it's like the PowerApps basic license for all of your users, and I believe that includes X amount of flows. I just don't know what X is off the top of my head.
All right, and the final question I have here in the queue right now is asking, is it better to create a mobile workspace or a custom app for standard functions like creating a sales order and order lines?
I'd say it's a horse apiece. So the mobile workspace, if you can build it in there, it's cool because if you open up the Unified Communications app, you're going to see all of your workspaces there. So if you can build it there and you don't need to get, I would say if you need to do any kind of level of customization, you may want to take, I look at the mobile workspaces as the base level. PowerApps is the next level. So if there's a roadblock when you're building, something like adding a sales order should be really easy to do with a mobile workspace. But depending on, maybe some different business needs, if you start running into something where you need to even just do a little bit of scripting or something, you might want to look at a Power App. I guess that's where I kind of make the separation between the two. Quite honestly, I was really jazzed about the mobile workspaces when these came out a while back. But the Power App stuff is really cool, and the fact that you can embed them into finance and operations as well. Again, if it requires anything, then just point and click the fields. Stick with the mobile workspace. It'll be much easier. But if it's going to go off the rails a little bit with some customization, go to PowerApps. Either one should be easy to do a basic level of that. But again, going back to maybe that initial flow question, if you're going to use a Power App and you're going to use flow, you may come up against some sort of per action fee. Now, it's like, you know, a 1/100th of a penny or something to send a flow. But if you do it through the mobile workspace, you're not going to get charged something extra.
All right, thank you for those questions. And I think at this point we can begin to wrap up. So Rick, thanks again for taking the time today to take us through all this and answer the questions.
Yeah, my pleasure. Anytime.
All right, and thanks to everyone in the audience for your time and attention today. With that, we will wrap up today's event. Have a great day, everybody.